Elliot Waverly walked into the general store on a Tuesday morning, set a folded piece of paper on the counter, and said 7 words that silenced every person in the room. "I'm giving the schoolhouse her salary myself." Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Margaret Hollis, who had run the store for 31 years and believed she had seen everything worth seeing in Willow Creek, Montana, pressed her hand flat against the wooden counter and stared at him like he had just confessed to a crime. Because in a town that small, what Elliot Waverly had just done was something close to it. Before we go any further, if this story already has your heart, please hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications so you never miss a single chapter. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's go back to where it all began. The morning Adeline Harper arrived in Willow Creek, Montana, nobody came to meet her at the station. That was the first thing she noticed. She stepped off the eastbound train with 2 heavy trunks, a wooden crate packed with books, wrapped in brown paper, and a carpet bag hanging from her left arm. The platform was empty except for a boy of about 12 sitting on a barrel, chewing the end of a dry piece of straw, watching her with the particular expression of a child who has been told not to stare but cannot quite help it. She smiled at him. He did not smile back. That was the second thing she noticed. Adeline set her bag down, straightened her coat, and looked out at the town that was to be her new home. Main Street stretched ahead of her, a single dirt road with a row of buildings on either side that looked like they had been put up quickly by people who were not entirely sure they were staying. A general store, a church with a crooked bell, a livery stable. A barber shop, a saloon at the far end with a hand-painted sign that had faded until the letters were almost unreadable. And at the center of it all, the one-room schoolhouse. She could see it from the platform. It sat slightly apart from the other buildings, like it had been placed there as an afterthought, or perhaps like something that the town had not yet decided what to do with. The roof needed patching. One of the shutters hung at an angle. But the door was painted red. Someone, at some point, had cared enough to paint it red, and that small detail made Adeline feel something she had not expected to feel until she was much further down Main Street. She felt hope. "You the new teacher?" She turned. The boy on the barrel had climbed down and was standing a few feet away, arms crossed, studying her with eyes that were too old for his face. "I am," she said. "My name is Miss Harper. What's yours?" "Thomas Briggs," he said. "My pa said you probably wouldn't last the winter." Adeline looked at him for a moment. "Well," she said pleasantly, "your pa doesn't know me yet." Thomas Briggs blinked. He had clearly been expecting a different reaction, embarrassment, perhaps, or a flustered denial. He uncrossed his arms. "I can carry one of them trunks," he said. "I would appreciate that very much, Thomas." He grabbed the smaller of the 2 trunks with both hands and began dragging it toward the road without another word. Adeline picked up the crate of books, her carpet bag, and followed him into Willow Creek. She had come from Boston. She had grown up in a household full of books and quiet conversations and gas lamps that burned until midnight while her father sat at his desk preparing lessons for students who would go on to become doctors and lawyers and teachers themselves. She had trained at one of the best institutions in Massachusetts. She had turned down 2 positions in cities where the schools were well funded and the housing was comfortable and the society was familiar. She had chosen Montana instead. People had thought she was being stubborn. Her mother had cried. Her father had said nothing for 3 long days, which was worse than crying. 2 of her closest friends had told her she was making a mistake that she would regret before spring. But Adeline Harper had read about the Western territories in her father's journals, and she had understood something that took most people a long time to understand. The places that needed her most were not the places that were already thriving. The places that needed her most were the places where someone had to care enough to show up. So she had shown up, and now she was being dragged through the mud of Willow Creek's Main Street by a 12-year-old boy whose father had already written her off, and she was looking at a schoolhouse with a broken shutter and a red door. And she was thinking that maybe she had been right after all. She did not notice Elliot Waverly the first time she passed him. He was standing outside the general store with his hat pulled low and his arms at his sides, watching her the way a man watches something unexpected, moving through familiar territory. Not suspicious, not unfriendly, simply watching. Later, she would think about that moment. She would try to reconstruct it, to understand how she could have walked within 10 feet of the man who would change life and not felt anything at all. But that was the nature of quiet things. They didn't announce themselves. Elliot Waverly was 35 years old and had owned the same cattle ranch on the edge of the valley for 11 years. He had built most of it with his own hands, the main house, the barn, the fence lines that stretched for nearly 3 miles along the eastern ridge. He had hired 2 hands in the beginning, good men who stayed because he treated them fairly, and over the years the herd had grown from a handful of cattle his father had left him into something that could sustain itself. He was not a wealthy man, but he was a man who owed nothing to anyone. In a town like Willow Creek, that counted for something. He paid his debts. He showed up when neighbors needed help. He did not drink to excess, did not gamble beyond what was reasonable, did not involve himself in the small cruelties that small towns sometimes visited upon the people who were different or unlucky, or both. He was quiet, he was steady, and he was alone. He had been alone since his mother died when he was 19, leaving him with the land and a set of tools and a silence in the house that he had never quite figured out how to fill. There had been a woman once briefly, when he was 23, but she had chosen someone else, and Elliot had accepted that the way he accepted drought or a bad yield, as something painful that had to be endured, and then set aside so the work could continue. After that, the years had simply passed. People in Willow Creek had stopped asking him about marriage the way they eventually stopped asking about things they believed were already decided. It was easier to assume Elliot Waverly was a man who had simply chosen solitude than to wonder whether solitude had chosen him. He had never corrected anyone, because the truth was harder to explain. The truth was that Elliot Waverly did not believe he was the kind of man someone stayed for. He believed he was the kind of man people appreciated and then left the way you appreciated a good fence or a reliable horse. Useful, dependable, something you were glad existed. But not something you built your life around. That belief had settled into him so quietly over so many years that he had stopped questioning it. It was simply part of the landscape of himself, like the ridge on the eastern edge of his property, or the way the wind came off the mountains in late October. He had stopped looking for something different, until the morning he saw the new schoolteacher arguing with the town council. It happened on her 3rd day in Willow Creek. Adeline had opened the schoolhouse and taken full accounting of what she had to work with, and the results had not been encouraging. There were 14 desks, 3 of which were broken. There were no maps, there were no readers beyond a single battered primer that looked like it had survived a flood. The chalk was nearly gone. There was no clock, there was no globe. There was a small shelf along the back wall that held exactly 4 books, one of which was missing its cover entirely. She had made a list, and then she had walked to the town hall, where the council held its meetings on Thursday mornings, and she had knocked on the door and asked to speak. They had let her in the way men let women into rooms they consider their own with the particular patience that is really a form of condescension. Adeline had unfolded her list on the table. "The school needs supplies," she said. "I have written down exactly what is required and the approximate cost of each item. I would like to discuss how the town intends to fund this." Gerald Marsh, who chaired the council and owned the largest share of the mill, looked at the list without touching it. "The school has been operating for 6 years," he said. "Whatever it had before you arrived was sufficient." "With respect, Mr. Marsh, the school had an attendance of 4 students before I arrived," Adeline said. "It now has 11, and if we want more families to send their children, we need to demonstrate that this school offers something worth sending them to." "We hired a teacher," said Frank Dooley, who sat on Marsh's right. "That's what we committed to, a teacher. A teacher without materials is like a blacksmith without iron," Adeline said. I can be here every morning and work until dark, and it will not matter if the children have nothing to learn from. Miss Harper, Gerald Marsh folded his hands. You are new here. You don't understand how things work in Willow Creek. The budget is what it is. If you require additional resources, I suggest you look elsewhere for them. Adeline looked at him. Then she folded her list, put it back in her coat pocket, and said, very calmly, I see. Thank you for your time, Mr. Marsh. She walked out. Elliot Waverly had been standing in the hall outside the council room, waiting to speak with Marsh about a water rights dispute along the southern fence line. He had heard every word through the door. He watched Adeline walk past him with her chin up and her shoulders straight and something burning very quietly behind her eyes. He said nothing, but the next morning he walked into the general store and set a folded piece of paper on Margaret Hollis's counter. I'm giving the schoolhouse her salary myself. Margaret stared at him. Her salary, she said. Elliot, the council is all ready. Not her salary, he said. For supplies. Whatever she needs. Margaret picked up the paper. It was a bank draft. She looked at the number on it, and then looked at him. This is 3 months' worth of. I know what it is, Elliot said. He adjusted his hat. I'd appreciate it if you didn't make a production of it. Elliot Waverly, Margaret said slowly, you haven't set foot inside that schoolhouse since you were 12 years old. I know that too. He walked out before she could say anything else. Adeline found out about the bank draft 2 days later. She was in the schoolhouse when Dorothy Pierce, the postmaster's wife, appeared in the doorway, holding a small envelope and wearing the expression of a woman delivering very significant news. This is from Waverly's account, Dorothy said, handing over the envelope. Margaret Hollis sent it over, said a certain rancher wanted it to go to the school without any fuss. Adeline opened the envelope. She read the note inside. It said, for whatever the children need, EW. She stood very still for a long moment. Then she folded the note carefully and put it in her pocket, the same pocket where she kept her list from the town council meeting, and she looked at Dorothy Pierce and said, do you know where the Waverly Ranch is? Dorothy's eyes brightened considerably. I do, she said. I absolutely do. She went the following Saturday. The road to the Waverly Ranch ran east from town along the creek, then turned up through a stand of cottonwood trees that were just beginning to turn gold at the edges. The morning was cold and bright, and Adeline walked it on foot because she did not yet own a horse and had not yet asked anyone to lend her one. Which was typical of her in those early weeks. She preferred to manage herself before she asked anything of anyone. She came around the bend in the road and the ranch spread out before her. She stopped. It was not what she had expected. She had expected something rough and improvised, the way she expected most things in Montana to be rough and improvised, because that was what she had been told to expect before she left Boston. But the Waverly Ranch was tended. That was the word that came to her. Every fence was straight and solid. The barn was well built and clean. The main house sat in the center of the property like something that had grown there, like it belonged to the land, rather than simply having been placed upon it. There were flowers. She noticed them because she had not expected them, a row of wild asters along the south wall of the house, straggling and half dormant as the season turned, but clearly planted deliberately. Someone had put them there. Someone had cared whether or not there was color against that wall. She walked up to the front of the house and knocked. Elliot Waverly opened the door. He was taller than she remembered from that first passing glance on Main Street. He had dark eyes and a jaw that looked like it had been cut from the same granite as the mountains behind him, and he was wearing the expression of a man who was genuinely surprised to find her standing on his porch. Miss Harper, he said. Mr. Waverly, she said, I came to thank you. A pause. You didn't need to do that, he said. I disagree, she said. May I come in? Another pause. Longer this. Yes, he said. Ma'am. She sat at his kitchen table while he made coffee, which he did with the focused efficiency of a man who had made coffee alone for many years and had never had occasion to rush it or make conversation while doing so. She looked around the kitchen. There were books on the shelf by the window. That surprised her. She stood up without asking permission, which was also typical of her, and tilted her head to read the spines. History, geology, a collection of Shakespeare that looked like it had been read many times. A worn copy of David Copperfield, she said. It came out more surprised than she intended. He set 2 cups on the table and looked at her steadily. Most people do, he said. She sat back down, a little chastened. I apologize, she said. I made an assumption. That was unkind. He sat across from her and wrapped his hands around his cup. It's a natural assumption to make, he said. Out here. It's still not a fair one, she said. He looked at her for a moment. No, he agreed, it isn't. They sat in silence for a beat. Outside, one of the ranch hands called to the other across the yard, and a horse answered somewhere in the barn. Why did you do it? Adeline asked. The money. You don't know me. You had no reason to. Elliot turned his cup slowly on the table. I know what a school without supplies looks like, he said. I sat in one. It's discouraging for the children. You could have said that to the council. The council wasn't listening. She looked at him. But you were, she said. He didn't answer that directly. He just picked up his cup and drank. There are 14 children in this town between the ages of 6 and 14, Adeline said. 3 of them can't yet read their own names. 2 of them have never held a book in their hands. That is not because those children aren't capable. It's because no one has given them the tools, she paused. What you did, what you gave them, that matters, Mr. Waverly, whether you're comfortable hearing that or not. Elliot set his cup down. He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at her. You're not what people were expecting, he said. She raised an eyebrow. What were they expecting? Someone easier to dismiss. Something moved across her face, not quite a smile, but something adjacent to it. A small flash of recognition. I get that a lot, she said. After that morning, they did not seek each other out. Not obviously. Not in any way that would have given the town something definitive to talk about. But the town talked anyway. That was the nature of Willow Creek. People noticed when Elliot Waverly repaired the broken shutter on the schoolhouse door on a Wednesday morning without anyone asking him to. They noticed when Adeline Harper stopped at the fence line along the eastern edge of the ranch on her way back from visiting the Patterson family and stood there for 15 minutes talking to a man who had never stood at that fence and talked to anyone before. They noticed things, and they decided things, the way small towns decide things quickly and with a confidence that has nothing to do with actual knowledge. He's sweet on her, said Frank Dooley's wife at the dry goods counter. She'll leave by spring, said Gerald Marsh to whoever would listen. They always do. Thomas Briggs, who had dragged Adeline's trunk from the station on her first day, told his father that Miss Harper was the best teacher he'd ever had. And when his father pointed out she was the only teacher he'd ever had, Thomas said that didn't change anything. Through all of it, Elliot Waverly said very little. That was nothing new. But what was new, what he would not have been able to name if anyone had asked directly, was that the silence had changed its quality. It was no longer simply empty. It was the kind of silence that exists between one thing ending and another beginning. He noticed when she was not on the road into town on the mornings he drove the wagon in for supplies. He noticed when the light was still on in the schoolhouse after dark. He noticed, and he told himself it was nothing, and he went back to his work. Until the afternoon she brought the children to the creek. He was mending fence along the south side of the property when he heard them small voices carrying across the water, high and scattered, the way children sound when they are genuinely surprised by something. He looked up. Adeline Harper was standing on the far bank with 8 children gathered around her, all of them looking down at something in the water. She was crouched at the edge of the creek, pointing at something below the surface, and even from across the width of the creek, he could hear her voice clear and steady. The way a good teacher's voice always is explaining something about currents and stone, and the way water carves its path over time. One of the younger children, a girl of about 7 named Clara, who had never spoken a word in the schoolhouse according to her mother, was lying flat on her stomach at the water's edge, with her hand trailing in the current and a look on her face that Elliot had not seen on many adult faces in his life, let alone on the face of a child. She looked as if she had just discovered that the world was larger than she had been told. Adeline looked up from the water and across the creek. She saw him. He had not moved. He was still holding the wire stretcher in one hand and a fence post in the other, and he was standing there watching her teach a child about water and stone, and for reasons he could not have explained to anyone. He felt something in the center of his chest that he had not felt in a very long time. She raised a hand, he raised his. She turned back to her students. He went back to his fence, but the feeling stayed. It was 3 weeks later that she asked him the question. She had been staying after school to sort through the new books that had arrived. Adeline had wasted no time spending the money he had given, and the results had been swift and visible. The schoolhouse now had maps. It had readers at 3 different levels. It had chalk and a clock and a small collection of nature specimens that she had organized into a display along the windowsill. It was late afternoon when Elliot came by to check on the fence repair he had done the week before. He found her on the steps with a stack of papers on her lap, making notes in the particular focused way she had that made it clear she was working and not simply sitting. He stopped at the base of the steps. "How's the fence?" she asked without looking up. "Holding," he said. She made another note. "Good," she looked up. "Sit down, Mr. Waverly. You're giving me a crick in my neck." He sat. For a moment they were quiet, which by now had become a comfortable thing between them, a silence that did not need to be filled. Then Adeline set her papers aside and looked at him with the direct, unguarded expression that he had come to recognize as the one that preceded something honest. "You have a good ranch," she said. "People respect you. You've lived here for years and never given anyone any reason to think poorly of you." She paused. "Why did you never marry?" He had been asked that question before. By his mother before she died, by a few well-meaning neighbors over the years. By Gerald Marsh once, who had not been well-meaning at all, but had asked it anyway, in the way men sometimes ask questions that are really statements. Every time Elliot had given the same answer, too busy. "The ranch takes all my time, never quite found the right moment." Reasonable answers, safe answers, answers that contained just enough truth to hold their shape. He opened his mouth to give one of those answers now. And what came out instead was the truth. "I was waiting for you." The words landed in the quiet afternoon, like something falling from a very great height. Adeline went completely still, not flustered, not embarrassed. Not the way a woman goes still when something unwanted has been said. The way a person goes still when something has been said that they did not know they needed to hear. Elliot looked at the ground. He stopped. "Try it again. I know that doesn't make sense." "No," she said quietly. "Say what you meant." He looked at her. Her eyes were steady. They were always steady. That was the thing about Adeline Harper. She did not look away from difficult things. She looked straight at them with the same calm attention she gave to everything, the way she looked at a child who was struggling, and did not make them feel small for it. Elliot turned his hat in his hands. "I've lived in this valley my whole life," he said slowly. "And I've watched good men find good women and build good lives, and I've been glad for them. I genuinely have. But I always knew, not in a way I could put into words, but I knew that what I was waiting for wasn't in Willow Creek." He stopped. "And then you walked into town, and you argued with the council on your 3rd day here. And you sent Clara Patterson home with a book in her hands for the first time in her life." He looked down at his hat. "And I understood what I'd been waiting for." The afternoon light was long and gold on the schoolhouse steps. Adeline was quiet for a long moment. "That's a considerable thing to say to someone you've known for 6 weeks, she said. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry if I didn't say it was wrong," she said. He looked at her. She picked up her papers again, but slowly, and she looked at him with something that was not quite a smile, but was something more serious and more true than a smile. "I'm going to need some time to think about that, Mr. Waverly," she said. He nodded. He put his hat back on. He stood up. "Elliot," he said. She looked up. "My name," he said. "If you're going to think about it, You might as well think about it by the right name." And then he walked away across the schoolyard and back toward his ranch, and Adeline Harper sat on the schoolhouse steps, holding her papers against her chest, and looked at the sky above the valley, and stayed there until the light was gone. In the weeks that followed, nothing was said directly. But everything shifted. She stopped calling him Mr. Waverly. He started leaving firewood stacked by the schoolhouse door on the coldest mornings without announcing it to anyone. She asked him questions about the land, about the geology of the ridge, about the way the creek changed course during the spring melt, about the plants that grew along the fence line, and whether any of them had uses she could teach the children about. He asked her questions about the books she read, not to make conversation, but because he genuinely wanted to know, in the careful, specific way he had of wanting to know things. He asked about Dickens once, and she told him about the social conditions of Victorian England for 45 minutes without stopping, and he listened to all of it, without interrupting. And when she finished and said, "I'm sorry, I can go on," he said, "Don't apologize. Keep going." She kept going. She told him later that it was the first time in years that anyone had told her to keep going. He told her later that it was the first time in years that he had not been ready for the conversation to end. Those two confessions were made months later, when confessions had become easier. In the early weeks, they simply moved around each other with the careful, attentive quality of people who are aware something full and important is growing between them and are afraid that the wrong movement will break it before it has time to take root. And in the center of all of it was the thing he had said on the schoolhouse steps. "I was waiting for you." She thought about it the way she thought about difficult problems, with sustained, honest attention, turning it over and examining it from different sides, not rushing toward a conclusion but not avoiding one either. She had had opportunities before, men in Boston who were educated and established and who had looked at her the way men looked at women they intended to marry. She had felt warmth for some of them, she had respected all of them. But none of them had ever said anything that felt like the truth the way Elliot Waverley's words had felt like the truth. None of them had ever looked at her and seen not her education, not her appearance, not her family's standing, but the specific woman she was. The one who argued with councils on her third day and sent children home with books and lay awake at night, thinking about the ones she hadn't yet reached. She thought about that. She thought about it for several weeks. And then in late October a letter arrived from Boston. It came on a Tuesday in an envelope with her mother's handwriting on the outside. And Adeline knew before she opened it that something was wrong, because her mother had never once written to her, since she left. All previous letters had come in her father's careful, measured script. She opened it, she read it, she sat down on the schoolhouse floor. Jonathan Harper had collapsed 2 weeks earlier. He had been teaching a class when it happened mid-sentence, which was so entirely like him that Adeline would have laughed if she had not been sitting on the schoolhouse floor reading that her father was very ill. Her mother's letter was not hysterical. Her mother was not a hysterical woman. But between the careful sentences, between the reassurances that her father was stable and that the doctor was hopeful, Adeline read what was not being said. "Come home." She sat on the floor for a long time. Then she folded the letter back into the envelope and put it in her pocket and stood up and walked to the ranch. She did not know why she walked to the ranch instead of to the post office or the church or the home of any one of the women in Willow Creek who had been kind to her since she arrived. She walked to the ranch. Elliot was in the yard when she came around the cottonwood bend, working on a piece of harness leather with the focused attention he brought to everything. He looked up and saw her, and he set the harness down and stood up without saying anything, because there was something in the way she was walking that told him words would need to wait. She stopped in front of him and handed him the letter. He read it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he folded it carefully and handed it back. "Your father," he said. "Yes." He looked at her. Not in the way people look at someone they are sorry for, not with that particular sliding sideways sympathy that makes grief harder instead of easier. He looked at her the way he looked at everything that mattered, straight and steady. "What do you need?" he asked. She had expected him to tell her what to do. Men always told women what to do in situations like this. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Yes, you do," he said. "What do you need?" She looked at him. "I need to go home," she said. "I need to see him. Then you should go." It was that simple. That immediate. No hesitation, no calculation, no mention of the school, or the children, or the fact that she had been in Willow Creek for only 2 months and was already the most important thing that had happened to the schoolhouse in 6 years. Just, "Then you should go." She looked at him for a long moment. "I don't want to leave," she said. "I have children who—" "The children will be here when you come back," he said. She noticed the certainty in that. "When you come back." "Not if. Come with me," she said. The words surprised her as much as they surprised him. "But she did not take them back, Elliot," she said quietly. "Come with me." He looked at her for a long time. The afternoon wind came off the mountains and moved through the cottonwoods behind them, and the harness he had been working on lay in the dirt of the yard, forgotten. And the cattle moved somewhere in the far pasture, and all of it felt very far away. "All right," he said. He said it the way he said everything that mattered, simply, without drama, as if the decision had already been made long before the question was asked. "All right," he said again. "Give me 2 days to arrange things with the hands." Adeline nodded. She turned to go. "Adeline." She stopped. She turned back. Elliot Waverley was standing in the middle of his yard with his hat in his hands and his dark eyes on her, and he looked for the first time since she had known him like a man who was not entirely sure of himself. "I want you to know something," he said. "Before we get on that train." He paused. "Whatever you decide about your father, about Boston, about all of it, I am not coming along to change your mind about anything. I am coming because you asked me, and because I would rather be in a place that is strange to me with you in it than stay somewhere familiar without you." She looked at him. She felt something settle in her chest, something that had been restless and searching, since she was old enough to know that the life she wanted was not the life she was expected to want. "All right, Elliot," she said. She said it the way he said things. Simply. 2 days, she said. And she walked back down the road toward town, while the cottonwoods threw their gold light after her, and Elliot Waverley watched her go until she was out of sight, and then he picked up his harness and went back to work. But his hands were not entirely steady, and for the first time in 11 years, the ranch felt like something he was leaving instead of something he was coming home to. 2 days passed faster than Elliot expected. He had arranged everything methodically, the way he arranged all things told his 2 ranch hands, Pete Odom and Carl Briggs, what needed doing in his absence, walked the fence lines one final time, checked the water supply, made sure the cattle were rotated to the south pasture where the grass held longer into the cold season. He had done all of it without explaining where he was going or why. Pete had not asked. "Boston," Elliot said. Carl stared at him. "Boston," Carl repeated, as if the word had arrived in a foreign language. "I'll be back inside 3 weeks," Elliot said. "Maybe 4. "You've never left this ranch for more than 4 days running," Carl said. "In 11 years, I know that. Does this have anything to do with the school teacher?" Elliot picked up his bag. "Take care of the south fence," he said. "The 3rd post from the elm is starting to lean." He walked out. Carl watched him go with the expression of a man witnessing something historic and not entirely sure whether to be concerned or pleased. The morning Elliot appeared at the train station, Adeline was already there with her smaller bag. She had left the trunks in the schoolhouse, which was, he realized, the most decisive statement of intent she could have made without saying a word. She was not packing up her life. She was stepping away from it temporarily. She intended to come back. He stood beside her on the platform without speaking. She looked at him sideways. "You came," she said. "I said I would." "Some men say things," and he said. "I'm not some men." She looked at him for a moment, with an expression he was beginning to recognize, that particular combination of assessment and warmth that meant she was deciding whether to believe something. Apparently she decided yes. She turned back toward the track. "The train is late," she said. "It usually is," he said. "Does that bother you?" Not much bothers me. That must be peaceful, she said. And there was something wry in her voice, something that pointed at herself, that made it clear she was not entirely describing him. He looked at her. What bothers you? He asked. She was quiet for a moment. Injustice, she said, carelessness. People who have the power to help and choose not to. She paused. And trains that are late. He almost smiled, almost. The train arrived 12 minutes behind schedule, and they boarded in silence, and the silence held all the way out of the valley and into the open plains of the east, where the sky stretched wide and the land flattened and everything about Montana that felt familiar began to fall away behind them. The first few hours of the journey they spent apart, Adeline with her letter and her thoughts, Elliot with his hat tilted against the window and his eyes on the moving land outside. But somewhere, after the second stop, when the fluctuated and the car emptied somewhat and the distance from Willow Creek became large enough to breathe differently, Adeline moved from her seat across the aisle and sat down beside him without asking. He did not move over, he did not comment. He simply shifted his hat off the window ledge to make room for her to look out if she wanted to. She looked out for a while. Then she said, "Tell me about your mother." He turned to look at her. Not defensive. Genuinely curious. "Because you've told me about the ranch and the cattle and the fence lines and the water table," she said. "And you've asked me about Dickens and educational theory, and the difference between phonics instruction and whole language reading. But you've never once mentioned another person in your life who mattered to you. And I think that says something." He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, the land moved past at a speed that made the near things blur, and the distant things clear the opposite of how memory worked, Elliot thought, where it was always the close details that stayed sharp. "She was a reader," he said finally. "Like you. She had a box of books she'd brought from Ohio when she and my father settled the ranch. She read to me every night until I was old enough to tell her I was too old for it, and then she just left the books on the table and didn't say anything, and I picked them up myself." He stopped. "She died when I was 19. I'm sorry," Adeline said. "She would have liked you," he said. He said it simply, without any performance around it. Just stated it like a fact about weather or geography. Adeline felt something shift in the center of her chest. "What makes you say that?" she said softly. "Because she didn't have any patience for people who pretended to be less than they were," he said. "And you don't either." Adeline looked at her hands. "I had a teacher once," she said. "I was 11. Her name was Miss Calder. She had a way of looking at you that made you feel like the person you were going to become was already visible to her, and she was simply waiting for you to catch up." She paused. "That's the teacher I'm trying to be." "You already are," he said. "You don't know that." "Clara Patterson," he said. "The girl who lay on her stomach at the creek. Her mother stopped me in town last week. She said Clara reads to her at the table every morning now. That's the first thing Clara does when she wakes up." He looked at her. "That's you. That's what you're already doing." Adeline pressed her lips together. She was not a woman who cried easily. She did not cry now. "But it was a near thing, Elliot," she said. "Ma'am." "Don't call me ma'am." "Adeline." "Thank you," she said, "for coming." "I know it isn't. I know the ranch. The ranch will be there when I get back," he said. "Some things keep." She nodded. She looked out the window. Then, after a moment, she said, "I'm frightened." He didn't say don't be. He didn't say I'm sure he'll be fine. He didn't do any of the things people do when they're uncomfortable with someone else's fear. He said, "I know." And somehow that was the right answer. They arrived in Chicago to change trains, which required 3 hours on a platform that was nothing like any platform Elliot had ever stood on, vast and loud and full of people moving in every direction at once. The air thick with coal smoke and voices, and the shrieking of metal against metal. He watched Adeline move through it, without flinching. She navigated the crowd, identified the correct platform, negotiated with a confused porter about their luggage, and found them a place to sit that was out of the direct path of the main foot traffic, all within 10 minutes of arriving. He stood beside her and watched her do it. "You've done this before," he said. I traveled to Cincinnati for a teacher's conference. 2 years ago, she said. And to New York once, and Philadelphia twice, she paused. Cities don't frighten me. What does, he said, besides trains being late? She looked at him. She sat down on the bench and folded her hands in her lap, and considered the question with the genuine seriousness she brought to all serious questions. Arriving too late, she said, for the things that matter. She paused. I left Boston because I believed there was somewhere I was more needed. And I still believe that. But the thing no one tells you about choosing the life you believe in is that you also have to live with the things you left behind. She looked at her hands. My father is sick, and I am in Chicago, and I left him. You didn't leave him, Elliot said. You went somewhere important. Tell me the difference, she said. When you're sitting in Chicago and your father is sick in Boston. He thought about it. He did not rush toward an answer. He sat down beside her and thought about it honestly, the way he thought about hard problems on the ranch, not to find the comfortable answer, but to find the true one. My father died when I was 24, he said. We hadn't spoken in 2 years. Not for any dramatic reason, just distance, and the way time moves when you're occupied with the daily work of surviving. He paused. I never got to finish a conversation I'd started when I was 19 and too young to know how to have it properly. Adeline looked at him. That's not the same, she said carefully. No, he agreed, it's not the same. But the feeling is adjacent. He turned his hat in his hands. You haven't been absent, Adeline. You've been building something. Your father knows the difference. Men like him always do. She was quiet for a long time. The Chicago platform roared and bustled and moved around them like a river, and they'd sat on their bench in the middle of it like two rocks that the current divided around and then rejoined behind. Tell me something, she said finally. What? Tell me something you've never told anyone. He looked at her. It was a bold thing to ask. She knew it was bold. She was watching him with that direct, uncondescending attention, waiting to see whether he would retreat into the safety of surface answers or trust her with something real. He thought for a moment. The first winter I ran the ranch alone, he said slowly. After my mother died, I thought about giving it up. Selling the land and going somewhere else. Starting over as something entirely different. He stopped. I spent 3 days in the house not working, which I had never done before and haven't done since. Just sitting at the table thinking about how much easier it would be to walk away. He paused. On the 4th morning, I got up and went out and started a new fence line. And I kept going. She was looking at him with great attention. Why, she said. What made you get up? I couldn't think of anywhere better to be, he said. Not anywhere that was real. He looked at her. That's the honest answer. Not noble, just there was nowhere better to go, so I stayed. And eventually, staying became the right choice instead of just the only one. She nodded slowly, he said. She raised her eyebrows. You ask me, he said simply. She looked down at her hands. When I was 22, she said, I was engaged. Briefly. She paused. His name was Edmund. He was a lawyer. My family approved. His family approved. Everything approved. She stopped. 3 months before the wedding, he told me he expected me to stop teaching once we were married. That a woman in his household wouldn't need employment. She was quiet for a moment. He said it so matter-of-factly, like it was already decided. Like the decision had never been mine to make. She folded her hands. I gave the ring back that afternoon. Elliot did not say anything for a moment. Good, he said. Just that. Not I'm sorry or how difficult or any of the softer responses. Just good. She looked at him. That's it, she said. Just good. Any man who tries to make you smaller than you are, Elliot said, is not a man worth staying engaged to. That's not complicated. She stared at him. Edmund's mother told me I was making a catastrophic mistake, she said. Edmund's mother was wrong, Elliot said. Half of Boston agreed with her. Half of Boston hasn't seen you teach, he said. She laughed. It came out unexpected and genuine, and it changed her whole face, opened it somehow, the way a window opens a room. Elliot had not heard her laugh before, not like that. Not the unself-conscious kind. He thought it was possibly the best sound he had heard in several years. He was careful not to let that show too plainly on his face. "You're different on a train," she said, when the laugh had settled. "How so? You talk more." He considered that. "There's less to do," he said. She shook her head, still smiling. "I don't think that's it," she said. "I think you're different when you're out of your territory." She tilted her head. "Is that insulting?" "No," he said. "It might be accurate. Which is it?" He looked at her. "Both," he said. She smiled again, smaller this time, more private. Their train was called. They stood up together, picked up their bags, and walked toward the platform, and somewhere in the movement and the crowd and the noise, her hand brushed his, and neither of them said anything about it, but neither of them moved away. Boston arrived on the third morning. Elliot had never seen a city like it, layered and dense and old in a way that Montana was not old, a place where the buildings were made of stone and the streets had been walked by enough generations that the cobblestones had worn smooth. It pressed in from all sides in a way that should have been suffocating, and instead felt strangely alive, like the city itself was a breathing thing. He did not say any of this out loud, but Adeline watched him take it in, watched the careful, controlled attention with which he observed everything, and she understood that he was doing what he always did, assessing. Learning, cataloging, filing it away in that methodical interior space where he kept the things that mattered. "It's a great deal of city," he said. "It is," she agreed. "You grew up in this." "I did." He looked at the street ahead. "And you chose Montana," he said. There was something in his voice. Not quite wonder, something more interior than wonder. "I chose Montana," she confirmed. He nodded. He didn't say anything else. But she understood what he was not saying, that it meant something to him, that understanding the scale of what she had left made the choosing more deliberate, more real. They hired a carriage to her parents' house. The ride was short, through streets that grew progressively more residential and quiet. Adeline sat with her bag on her lap and her hands folded over it, and Elliot sat across from her and watched her face in the way he had of watching things, not intrusively, but steadily, the way you watch something you want to understand. She was frightened. He could see it now, that they were close, a tightening around her eyes, a very slight change in her breathing. "Adeline," he said. She looked at him. "He's going to be all right," he said. "You don't know that." "No," he said, "but you need someone to say it." "So I'm saying it." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded, and they arrived. The Harper house was a tall, narrow brownstone on a quiet street, with a brass knocker on the door and a lamp burning in the front window that Adeline told him later had burned in that window every evening, for as long as she could remember her father's signal, even before electricity, even before gas lines, that the house was open and the people inside were awake and the world outside was welcome. Her mother opened the door before they knocked. Eleanor Harper was a small woman, precise and composed, with Adeline's eyes and a posture that communicated dignity without effort. She saw her daughter and her face moved through relief and love and exhaustion in rapid sequence. Then she looked at Elliot. She looked at him very carefully. "Mother," Adeline said, "this is Elliot Waverly. He came with me from Montana." Eleanor Harper extended her hand. Elliot took it. "Waverly," she said. Her voice gave nothing away, Mrs. Harper, he said. "I'm sorry about your husband." She looked at him for another moment, assessing, the same way Adeline assessed, he realized. It was clearly a family trait, and then she stepped aside and said, "Come in." Jonathan Harper was in the study. He was sitting in an armchair by the window, which was not where Adeline had expected to find him. She had half braced herself for a bed, for the particular prone helplessness of serious illness. But her father was sitting upright, thinner than she remembered, with a blanket across his lap and a book closed on the side table beside him. And when she came through the doorway, he looked up, and the relief on his face was so unguarded and complete that she crossed the room, put her arms around him, before she could think of anything to say. He held her. He was thinner, she could feel that, but his arms were still strong. "You came," he said. "Of course I came," she said. "The school—" "Hush," she said. "The school is fine." "I'm here." When she finally pulled back and wiped her eyes, Jonathan Harper looked over her shoulder at Elliot Waverley, who had remained in the doorway with his hat in his hands and his eyes on the floor, giving them the privacy of the moment with the particular sensitivity of a man who has learned to read rooms. "Who is this?" Jonathan Harper said. Adeline turned. "This," she said, "is Elliot Waverley. He owns a cattle ranch in Willow Creek. He came with me." Jonathan Harper studied him. Elliot met his eyes without discomfort. "Why?" Jonathan said. It was the kind that expected a direct answer. He was a teacher, Elliot remembered. Teachers asked questions they already suspected the answer to. "Because your daughter asked me to," Elliot said. Jonathan Harper was quiet for a moment. "And if she hadn't asked?" Elliot considered. "I would have wanted to," he said. "But I wouldn't have come." Jonathan looked at him for a long time. Then he nodded, once the way a man nods when something he has been told confirms something he has already concluded. "Sit down, Mr. Waverley. Eleanor will make tea." Elliot sat. The days that followed were quiet ones. Elliot stayed at a boarding house 2 streets over, because it would not have been appropriate to stay in the Harper home, and he spent the mornings walking the city, taking in the things that were different from Montana, the density and age of it. The way people moved through streets that had been worn into patterns by centuries of use, and the afternoons at the Harper house, where Jonathan Harper had, apparently, decided that Elliot Waverley was worth talking to. It began on the second afternoon. Elliot arrived to find Adeline and her mother out visiting the doctor's office for a follow-up consultation, and Jonathan Harper alone in his study with his book and his blanket, and the particular restlessness of a man who has been confined longer than he is comfortable with. "Sit down," Jonathan said. Elliot sat. "Tell me about the ranch," Jonathan said. So Elliot told him about the ranch honestly, and without embellishment, the way he talked about everything. The size of it, the history of it, the 11 years of building it from something marginal into something self-sustaining. The cattle, the fence lines, the water rights dispute with the neighbor to the south. The 2 hands who had stayed because the terms were fair. Jonathan listened the way good teachers listened, with complete attention, asking occasional questions that were precise and probing, and that suggested he understood more than he initially appeared to. "And the school?" Jonathan said. Elliot paused. "What about it?" "You funded it," Jonathan said. "Adeline told me." "Some supplies," Elliot said. "What the town councils wouldn't provide." Why? Elliot looked at his hat, which he had set on his knee. "Because the children needed them," he said. "That's not why," Jonathan said. Elliot looked at him. The older man had the calm, unhurried expression of someone who has spent a lifetime watching people try to give partial answers to complete questions. "No," Elliot said. "It's not the only reason. What's the other reason?" Elliot was quiet for a moment. "Your daughter walked into a situation that wasn't fair," he said. "She was doing right by those children, and the people with the power to help her had decided not to. I didn't like it. It was as simple as that." Jonathan studied him. "And now," he said, "is it still as simple as that?" Elliot met his eyes. "No, sir," he said. "It's considerably more complicated now." Jonathan Harper nodded slowly. He picked up his book. He did not open it. "Adeline has never brought anyone home before," he said. "In 26 years. Elliot said nothing. "She's told you about Edmund," Jonathan said. "She has." "Edmund was a reasonable man," Jonathan said. "Sensible. Educated." He paused. He looked at Adeline and saw a woman. "You look at her and see what, Mr. Waverley?" Elliot thought about it. He thought about it genuinely, turning it over. "Someone who doesn't do things by half," he said finally. "Someone who sees what needs doing and does it, even when it costs her. Someone who makes everyone around her believe that what they're doing matters." He stopped. "A person I don't want to lose sight of." Jonathan Harper was very quiet. He opened his book. He read 2 pages. Then he said, without looking up, "She takes after her mother." In the best ways and the difficult ones, he turned a page. "You should be prepared for that." Elliot looked at him. "I am prepared for that," he said. Jonathan looked up. Something in his expression had changed. The formal assessment had become something warmer. Something that was not yet acceptance, but was the nearest thing to it. "She told me about the question she asked you," Jonathan said. On the schoolhouse steps, Elliot stiffened, just slightly. "She told you what I said," he said. "She told me what you said," Jonathan confirmed. "I meant it," Elliot said. "I want you to know that." I don't say things I don't mean." "I know," Jonathan said. "That's evident." He paused. "Do you understand what it means to love a woman like my daughter?" "I'm beginning to," Elliot said. "It means never making her choose between the life she chose and the person she chose," Jonathan said. Edmund never understood that. He believed love was a transaction. That she owed him a diminished version of herself in exchange for his company and his stability. He looked at Elliot steadily. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "Yes, sir," Elliot said. "I do. Then we have nothing else to discuss on this particular subject," Jonathan said, and returned to his book with the decisive air of a man who has concluded an examination and is satisfied with the result. Elliot sat in the chair across from him. Outside, the city moved and breathed. He sat there until Adeline came home. She appeared in the doorway of the study and stopped when she saw the two of them, her father reading, Elliot sitting across from him in the armchair with his hat in his lap and his eyes on the middle distance. The particular quality of the silence between them told her everything. "What did you say to him?" she said to Elliot. "The truth," Elliot said. She looked at her father. Jonathan Harper turned a page without looking up. "He'll do," Jonathan said. Adeline stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she looked at Elliot with an expression he had not seen on her face before, not the warmth he was accustomed to, not the directness, not the careful assessment. Something more unguarded than all of those. Something that looked a great deal like relief. Like she had been carrying something for a very long time and had just been told she could put it down. "Tea is ready," she said. "Good," said her father. Elliot stood up. He was careful not to let her see that his hands were not entirely steady. They walked to the sitting room together, and Eleanor Harper poured tea from a pot that had been in the Harper family for 30 years, and Jonathan came slowly from the study with his blanket and lowered himself into his chair. And they sat in the late afternoon light of the Boston house and talked about ordinary things: the school, the ranch, the town of Willow Creek, the children who were learning to read. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, without ceremony, without anyone marking the moment, the Waverly Ranch stopped being a place where one man lived alone and started being something else. Not yet what it would become, but something different from what it had been. And Elliot Waverly, sitting in the warm light of a Boston sitting room with a cup of tea in his hands, and Adeline Harper 3 feet away, understood that the decision he had made when she asked him to come with her was not the decision it had appeared to be on the surface. He had not been deciding to accompany her east. He had been deciding, without knowing it, never to go back to the way things had been before. And he found sitting there in the city that was nothing like his home, that he was not afraid of that at all. He was simply ready. Jonathan Harper's recovery was not linear. That was the first thing Elliot learned about serious illness. It did not move in a straight line the way a fence ran from post to post. It moved sideways and doubled back and gave you 3 good days, followed by one that made the 3 good days feel like a lie. Jonathan would eat well in the morning, and by evening be exhausted in a way that frightened Eleanor, who managed her fear the same way Adeline managed everything, by doing something productive with her hands and keeping her face composed. Elliot recognized that quality in both of them. He recognized it because he shared it. On the 5th morning in Boston, he arrived at the Harper house to find Adeline in the kitchen alone, standing at the counter with a cup of cold tea and the expression of someone who had been awake since before it was reasonable to be awake. "He had a bad night," she said before he could ask. "How bad?" "Bad enough that Mother called the doctor at 2 in the morning. She set the cup down. He's stable now, resting. The doctor says the fever broke, which is good. He says we need to be patient, which is easy to say when it isn't your father." Elliot pulled out a chair at the kitchen table and sat down. "Come sit," he said. "I'm fine standing, Adeline." She looked at him. "Come sit," he said again. She came and sat. She put her elbows on the table and her face in her hands, and for a moment she was simply a woman who was frightened and tired and far from the routines that usually held her steady. Elliot did not say anything. He got up and found the stove and made fresh tea because the cup on the counter was cold and useless, and he set a new cup in front of her and sat back down. She looked at the Kim. "You made tea," she said. "It wasn't complicated," he said. "Elliot." She wrapped her hands around the cup. "Thank you for being here. I know I keep saying it." "You've said it twice," he said. "That's not excessive." She almost smiled. "I keep thinking," she said, "that I should be stronger than this. That I chose to leave Boston. That I made my decision, and I should be able to live with all the parts of it, including the parts that are difficult." "That's not how choosing works," Elliot said. She looked at him. "You can make the right choice," he said, "and still have to live with what it costs you." "Those aren't contradictory." He paused. "The ranch was the right choice. It cost me 11 years of loneliness. Both of those things are true." She was quiet for a moment. 11 years, she said. "Give or take, that's a long time to be lonely." "I stayed busy," he said. "That's not the same thing." "No," he agreed, "it isn't." She drank her tea. He watched her shoulders drop fractionally as the warmth of it went through her. "Tell me something," she said. "Something ordinary." "About the ranch. About something that happened before I got there." He thought about it. "Last February," he said, "one of the calves got separated from the herd in a snowstorm. Took me and Pete Odom 4 hours to find her. She'd wedged herself into a gap in the south fence and couldn't get back out." He paused. "By the time we found her, she was half frozen and furious about it. Fought us the entire way back." Adeline was smiling now. "A real one. What did you do with her?" "Put her in the barn for 3 days. Fed her by hand. She bit Pete twice." "Good for her," Adeline said. He agreed eventually. She laughed again, that same unguarded laugh he had first heard in Chicago, the one that changed her face. He was beginning to be able to predict it. It appeared when something surprised her genuine self instead of her professional self, when something reached past the competence and the directness and got to the person underneath. He was beginning to understand that the person underneath was softer than anyone who only knew Adeline Harper's public self would have guessed, and that she was very careful about who got to see it. He was careful not to let on how much it meant that she was letting him. The crisis came without warning, the way crises always did. It was the 7th day. Elliot had spent the morning at the boarding house writing letters to Pete Odom about the south fence and a water rights document that needed to be filed with the county before the end of the month. He was halfway through the second letter when there was a knock at his door, and he opened it to find a young boy of about 10th standing on the step holding a folded note. He opened it. "Please come." 2 words. He had his coat on before he finished reading them. He walked the 2 streets to the Harper house in under 4 minutes, which he managed by not slowing down for anything. When he knocked, Eleanor Harper opened the door immediately, and the look on her face stopped him cold. Not grief, not that, but something close to the edge of it. "He's asking for her," Eleanor said. "He's been asking for 20 minutes, and she won't go in." "Where is she?" Eleanor pointed to the hallway. Adeline was standing outside her father's study door, with her back against the wall and her arms crossed over her chest and an expression on her face that Elliot had never seen before. She looked like someone standing at the edge of something they were afraid to jump from, not because they didn't want to jump, but because they were afraid of what they would find when they landed. He walked to her. He stopped in front of her. "Adeline," he said. "I can't," she said. "You can, Elliot." Her voice was low and shaking in a way he had never heard from her. What if I go in there and he's asking for you," Elliot said. "That means he's here, he's present, he wants you." He waited until she met his eyes. "He needs you in that room, not in this hallway." She pressed her lips together. "I'm frightened," she said. "I know," he said. "Go anyway." She looked at him for a long moment, then she uncrossed her arms. She straightened her spine the way he had seen her do it, a dozen times that particular physical act of gathering herself, and she put her hand on the door handle. She stopped. "Stay here," she said. "Don't go back to the boarding house." I'm not going anywhere, he said. She opened the door and went in. Elliot moved to the chair in the hallway and sat down and waited. He waited for 40 minutes. He heard voices inside, low ones, not words, just the rhythm of speech and response. At one point he heard her cry, a brief and genuine sound that she was clearly not trying to hide. At another point he heard her laugh softly, which was harder to hear than the crying, for reasons he could not have entirely explained. Eleanor came and sat in the chair across from him. They did not speak. They simply waited together, which was its own kind of conversation. After 40 minutes the door opened. Adeline came out. Her eyes were red. Her face was completely still with the aftermath of something large and real having passed through it. She looked at Elliot. He wants to meet you properly, she said. Not as the man who came with me. He has things he wants to say. Elliot stood up. Elliot. She put her hand on his arm. It was the first time she had touched him with intention, not accidentally, not in passing, but deliberately, as a choice. He's going to ask you things, about your intentions. She stopped. He's a very direct man, I noticed, Elliot said. Don't be evasive with him. He'll respect you less for it. I'm never evasive, he said. She almost smiled. She said. You're not. She let go of his arm. Go in. He went in. Jonathan Harper was propped against pillows, thinner and more diminished by the illness than he had been 4 days ago, but his eyes were completely clear and his voice, when he spoke, had the steadiness of a man who had decided to use whatever energy he had left for something specific. Sit down, Mr. Waverley, he said. Elliot sat. I spoke plainly to you the other day, Jonathan said, about what it means to love a woman like my daughter. You did, Elliot said. I have more to say. Jonathan paused. He seemed to be choosing his words, not because he was unsure of them, but because he wanted them to be precisely right. Adeline has been afraid of being known, he said. Do you understand what I mean by that? Elliot considered the question. She shows people her competence, he said slowly. She shows them her purpose, what she can do, what she believes in. She's generous with that. He paused, but the interior of her, the frightened part, the uncertain part that she guards. Jonathan studied him. Yes, he said, exactly that. He shifted against his pillows. She was different in the hallway today. Elliot said nothing. Eleanor told me she sent for you, Jonathan said. Before she could go in, she sent a note, Elliot said. 2 words, Jonathan said. My daughter, who has words for everything, sent 2 words. He looked at Elliot steadily. She doesn't do that. She doesn't ask. She manages. She handles things herself. She has been handling things herself since she was 8 years old and decided she was old enough to do so. He paused. She asked you. She did, Elliot said. That means something, Jonathan said. That means a great deal. Elliot did not fill the silence. I want to ask you something directly, Jonathan said. And I want you to answer me the same way. Yes, sir. Do you intend to marry my daughter? The room was completely quiet. Elliot held Jonathan Harper's gaze. I intend to ask her, he said. Whether she says yes is her decision. I won't presume her answer. Jonathan was quiet for a moment, and if she says no, then I'll respect that, Elliot said, and I'll still make sure the schoolhouse has what it needs. Something shifted in Jonathan Harper's face. It was not a smile exactly, it was the expression of a man recognizing something he has been searching for. I taught for 31 years, Jonathan said. I taught children, and then I taught teachers. I learned to identify a particular quality in people, a quality that is very difficult to describe, but very easy to recognize once you've seen it enough times. He paused. It is the quality of a person who tells the truth, even when a comfortable lie would serve them better. Not because they are incapable of tact, because they have decided that honesty is a form of respect. He looked at Elliot. You have that quality, he said. My daughter has it. It is why she is an excellent teacher. It is also why she has had difficulty finding her place among people who prefer comfort to truth. Elliot nodded, Mr. Waverley. Jonathan said, I am going to say something to you that I have never said to anyone who has expressed interest in my daughter. Are you listening? Yes, sir, you have my blessing, Jonathan Harper said. Whatever she decides, if she chooses you, you have mine. Completely and without reservation. He paused. That is not something I give lightly. Elliot looked at the man in the bed. He thought about the right thing to say. Thank you, he said. I'll try to be worthy of it. Jonathan reached over to his side table and picked up his book. See that you are, he said, and opened it. Elliot stood, and as he reached the door, Jonathan said, without looking up, tell Adeline I'd like some of that soup Eleanor made. I'm hungry. That's a good sign. I'll tell her, Elliot said. He walked out into the hallway. Adeline was still there. She had not moved from the spot outside the door. She looked at him with the question she was not quite asking, and he said, he's hungry. He wants Eleanor's soup. The relief that moved across her face was complete and unguarded. That is a good sign, she said. That's what he said. She exhaled. She looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then she looked at him. What did he say to you? She said. Things that were his to say, Elliot said. And now they're mine to keep. She held his gaze. Elliot. He's going to be all right, Elliot said. That's the important thing. She looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded, once the same way her father nodded, decisive and complete. All right, she said. She went to tell Eleanor about the soup. The twist came on the 9th day, and Elliot did not see it coming. He should have. The signs were there. In the way certain things are visible only in retrospect, when you can look back and understand that the ground had been shifting beneath your feet for some time before it gave way. It came in the form of a man named Charles Whitmore. He arrived at the Harper house on a Tuesday afternoon in a carriage that bespoke money without being ostentatious about it. Wearing a coat that had been made for him specifically, and carrying his hat in one hand with the ease of a man who was accustomed to being received well. He was perhaps 40, handsome in the measured, symmetrical way of men who have always been told so, and he walked to the Harper door with the particular confidence of someone who expected it to open for him. It opened. Eleanor Harper opened it. The expression on her face, a complicated flash of something that was not quite welcome and not quite its opposite, registered and was gone before Elliot, who was sitting in the parlor with a book he had been pretending to read, could fully interpret it. Charles, Eleanor said. I didn't know you were in the city. I heard about Jonathan, Charles Whitmore said. His voice was warm and practiced. I came as soon as I could. Is he receiving visitors? He's resting, Eleanor said. But come, we'll see. Charles Whitmore came in. He stopped when he saw Elliot. Elliot stood. The two men looked at each other for a moment with the mutual assessment of strangers, who immediately understand that they are not exactly strangers in the relevant sense that they are occupying the same space in relation to the same person, which makes them something more specific than strangers. Charles Whitmore, the man said, extending his hand. Elliot Waverley, Elliot said, taking it. Are you a colleague of Jonathan's? Charles said. He said it pleasantly. He had an excellent manner. No, Elliot said, I came with Adeline from Montana. Something moved across Charles Whitmore's face, quick and controlled, but there. He said, Montana. He said the word the way Gerald Marsh said it when he was trying to be polite about something he considered a mistake. Adeline appeared in the doorway from the kitchen. She stopped. Something passed between her and Charles Whitmore, a long look that had history in it, the kind of history that accumulates between people who have known each other at an important time and have never quite resolved what that time meant. Charles, she said. Her voice was completely even. Adeline. He crossed to her and took her hand, not shaking it, holding it briefly, in both of his, in the way that implies more claim than a handshake. I came as soon as I heard about your father. I'm sorry. How is he? Better, she said. Thank you for coming. She gently removed her hand from his. She looked at Elliot. The look was brief and deliberate and said several things at once, none of which could be said aloud in front of Charles Whitmore. Elliot sat back down and picked up his book. He was not actually reading a word of it. Eleanor did not permit Charles to see Jonathan that day. Jonathan was genuinely resting, and Eleanor was not a woman who would compromise her husband's rest for social obligation, regardless of who was asking. So Charles stayed for tea, which meant that Elliot stayed for tea. And for 45 minutes the four of them sat in the Harper parlor, while Charles Whitmore was charming and attentive and very subtly but unmistakably present in the way of a man who considers himself to have a claim on something and is reasserting it without quite saying so. He talked about Boston, about mutual acquaintances. About his work. He was a lawyer, as it turned out, which was a piece of information that landed differently than it might have if Adeline had not already told Elliot about Edmund on the train platform in Chicago. He was not Edmund. Elliot understood that quickly enough. He was subtler than Edmund, more careful. He did not say anything that could be objected to. He was simply there, filling the room with his warmth and his ease and his obvious familiarity with everything in it, and watching Adeline with the particular focused attention of a man who had decided something and was waiting for the right moment to say it. Elliot watched Adeline. She was perfectly composed. She answered questions. She laughed at appropriate moments. She was gracious and engaged and gave nothing away. But twice, only twice, and briefly she glanced at Elliot. Not for rescue, not with distress, with something more specific than that. As if she was checking that he was still there. He stayed still in his chair and let her see that he was. When Charles finally left with warm handshakes and promises to return tomorrow when Jonathan might be feeling well enough for visitors, Elliot set down his book and waited. Eleanor excused herself to check on Jonathan. The parlor was quiet. Adeline sat across from him with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the window. "Charles Whitmore," Elliot said. She said, "Old acquaintance." "Yes, more than that," Elliot said, not accusing. "Just stating." "We courted briefly," she said. 3 years ago, before I left for Montana. It ended. She paused. "He wanted me to stay in Boston. He made that very clear. He believed Montana was a phase, that I would be back within a year, disillusioned, and that he would be here when I arrived." Elliot said nothing. "He is apparently still here," she said. "He looked at you like a man who has made a decision," Elliot said. She said. "I noticed." "What are you going to do?" She was quiet for a moment. "What would you like me to do?" she said. It was a loaded question, and she knew it was a loaded question, and she was watching him with an expression that was both direct and careful, waiting to see what he would do with it. Elliot thought about the answer that was easiest, the one that put no pressure on her, the one that kept everything comfortable and undemanding. He set it aside. "I would like you to be honest with him," he said. "And with yourself," he paused, "whatever that means." She looked at him. "That's not a safe answer," she said. "No," he said, "but it's the right one." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, "I don't want Charles Whitmore, Elliot." He held her gaze. "I know," he said. "I need you to know that I'm telling you that, because it's true," she said. "Not because I'm trying to manage your feelings, or because I think you need reassuring." "I know that too," he said. "You're very certain of things," she said. There was something in her voice that was not quite complaint and not quite wonder. "I'm certain of the things I can observe," he said. "You've been checking to make sure I was in the room." He paused. "You weren't checking because you were worried I'd be upset. You were checking because you wanted to know someone was here who knew the whole truth." She looked at him for a very long time. "Yes," she said. "That's all I needed to know," he said. She exhaled slowly. Outside, a carriage moved down the street. Eleanor called from the kitchen that Jonathan was asking for Adeline. Adeline stood. She stopped beside Elliot's chair. "Thank you," she said. "For not making that harder than it needed to be." "That's not how I do things," he said. She put her hand briefly on his shoulder. Then she went to her father. Charles Whitmore came back the next afternoon as promised. Jonathan was well enough to receive him, which Adeline had privately dreaded, and which Jonathan himself had apparently decided was necessary. She stood outside the study for the first 10 minutes of the visit, telling herself she was not listening anyway. She heard Charles's voice, smooth and well modulated. She heard her father's voice, quieter but clear. She could not make out words. She moved away from the door. Elliot was in the kitchen helping Eleanor with something she had no idea when that had started happening. But Eleanor had apparently decided that Elliot was trustworthy enough to involve in the domestic mechanics of the house, which from Eleanor was significant. He was at the table cutting bread with the focused economy of motion he brought to all physical tasks, and Eleanor was at the stove. And they were talking in the low, easy way of people who have established that they do not need to perform for each other. Adeline stopped in the doorway and watched them for a moment. Something about the scene undid her a little. Eleanor had never warmed quickly to anyone. She had been polite to Charles Whitmore for 3 years and had never once cut bread with him. She looked at Elliot. She thought about what her father had said to her the day she had finally gone into his room and allowed herself to be frightened out loud. He had said, "The right person is the one who makes ordinary moments feel like they're worth having." She had thought she understood what he meant. Standing in the kitchen doorway, watching Elliot Waverly cut bread with her mother, she understood it differently. She stepped into the kitchen. "How is your father?" Eleanor asked. "Entertaining Charles," Adeline said, "whatever that means." Eleanor and Elliot exchanged a glance. It was brief and contained something that had the quality of an agreement reached without words. Adeline noticed it. "What?" "Nothing," Eleanor said. "Mother." Eleanor set down her spoon. She turned to face her daughter with the expression she had always worn when she was about to say something that was true and inconvenient. "Charles Whitmore is a good man," Eleanor said. "He is stable and educated, and he cares about you in his way." She paused. "But he has always loved the idea of you more than the actual you. The actual you he finds somewhat," she paused, "overwhelming." Adeline stared at her. "You never said that," she said. "In 3 years, you never once said that. You didn't ask," Eleanor said. "And you had already decided. I saw no reason to add commentary to a decision already made correctly." Adeline looked at her mother. Then she looked at Elliot, who was very carefully focused on the bread. "You knew," she said to him, "from the first day you met him." "I suspected," he said. "I didn't know." "What did you suspect?" He set down the knife. "That he was here for the version of you he remembered," he said. "The Boston version. The one who was still deciding whether Montana was real." He met her eyes. "But you're not that person anymore. You've already chosen." She held his gaze. "I have." The study door opened. Charles Whitmore's voice carried down the hall, warm departing, the particular register of a social visit concluding. Then the sound of the front door, then quiet. Jothan called for Eleanor. Eleanor went. The kitchen was suddenly just the two of them. Adeline walked to the table and sat down across from where Elliot had been standing. She put her hands flat on the table. "He asked my father for permission to court me," she said. "Properly." Elliot went still. "What did your father say?" he asked. "I don't know yet," she said. "But I know what I'm going to say when Charles asks me." Elliot looked at her. She was looking back at him with an expression that was completely unguarded, no professional distanced. Careful management, just Adeline Harper in a kitchen in Boston telling the truth. "Elliot," she said, "I need to ask you something." "Ask," he said. "On the schoolhouse steps," she said. "When you said you were waiting for me," she paused. "Did you mean it the way I think you meant it?" The kitchen was very quiet. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "How do you think you meant it?" "That you weren't waiting for a wife," she said. "You were waiting for a specific person. Someone particular. Someone you would know when you saw her because nothing else would quite fit the same way." The word yes was the simplest answer. He had never been a man who used more words than necessary. "Yes," he said. She exhaled. She looked at her hands on the table. Then she looked up. "Then I need to tell you something," she said. "Something I should have said before now." She paused. "The morning I went to your ranch to thank you for the money, for the schoolhouse, I already knew." He frowned slightly. "Knew what? That you were different," she said. "From anyone I had met before. I had been there 20 minutes and I already knew." She stopped. "I told myself it was too soon to know anything, that I had just arrived." That I was too practical a person to make decisions based on 20 minutes in a man's kitchen. She paused. I have been telling myself that for 2 months. Elliot did not move. And now, he said. And now I am in Boston, she said. And my father is getting better. And Charles Whitmore wants to court me. And I am sitting in my mother's kitchen thinking that the only place I want to be is back in Willow Creek. She held his gaze. And I know that's not only about the school. The silence between them had weight now. Not uncomfortable weight. The weight of something real that has been acknowledged and cannot be unacknowledged. Elliot looked at the table. He looked at her hands on it, flat and steady. He reached across and put one of his over them, not dramatic. Not sweeping. Just his hand over hers, the way you cover something you want to protect from the cold. She turned her hand over beneath his. She held it. They sat like that in the kitchen of the Harper house and in Boston while November moved outside the window, and Jonathan got better in the next room. And the city went about its business, and neither of them said anything. Because there was nothing left to say that the silence wasn't already saying more clearly. Then Eleanor came back into the kitchen and looked at the two of them and said, without missing a beat, Jonathan wants to know if there's any more of that soup. Adeline laughed. Elliot stood and went to the stove. And the moment became something ordinary, which was, Adeline thought, exactly how the best moments always ended not with fanfare, but with soup and someone you trusted standing at the stove making it. Charles Whitmore did not accept the answer quietly. That was the thing about men like him. They had spent enough of their lives being told, yes, that a no arrived as a category error, something to be corrected rather than accepted. He came back the following morning, which was the 10th day of Elliot and Adeline's time in Boston, and he came with the particular composure of a man who had spent the previous evening reorganizing his arguments. Adeline received him in the parlor. Elliot was in the kitchen with Eleanor, which had become, over the previous days, something close to his natural position in the Harper house, present enough to be available, far enough to give privacy, near enough to hear if something required him. Eleanor had stopped pretending this arrangement was accidental. She simply handed him tasks and let him get on with them, which was how Eleanor Harper expressed approval of a person. He could hear the parlor from the kitchen. He was not trying to listen. He listened anyway. Charles Whitmore's voice carried well. Adeline, he said, I think you owe me the courtesy of a real conversation rather than a dismissal. I didn't dismiss you, Charles, Adeline said. Her voice was even and calm. I gave you a clear answer. You gave me a refusal without an explanation. The explanation is that my answer is no, she said. That should be sufficient. Is it him? Charles said. The rancher. It isn't about anyone else, she said. It's about what I want. And what do you want? His voice shifted, not anger, something more calculated than anger. You want to spend your life in a frontier town teaching children, who may or may not stay long enough to appreciate it. You want to live in a place with no society, no culture, no... Stop, Adeline said. He stopped. I want you to listen to me very carefully, she said. Because I'm going to say this once, and I want you to hear every word of it. A pause. I don't need society the way you mean it. I don't need the things you're describing, because I've built something that matters more to me than any of them. I am not in Montana because I ran out of options. I am there because I chose it. Do you understand the difference? Silence. Adeline. Those children are not a consolation prize, she said, and her voice had dropped lower, which in Elliot's experience meant she was more serious, not less. They are not something I settled for. They are the reason I get up in the morning, and the reason I will get back on that westbound train the moment my father is strong enough. Another pause. You have never understood that about me. You've always believed that eventually I would come to my senses and want what you want. I am telling you now, clearly and finally, that I will not. The parlor was quiet. Elliot set down the cup he had been holding. In the kitchen doorway, Eleanor Harper was standing with her arms folded across her chest and an expression on her face that could only be described as fierce satisfaction. She caught Elliot's eye. My daughter, she said quietly. Yes, ma'am, he said. They heard Charles Whitmore cross the parlor floor. They heard the front door open and close. Then Adeline appeared in the kitchen doorway, with color in her cheeks and her chin up, and that particular brightness in her eyes that appeared after she had done something that cost her something. "He's gone," she said. "We heard," Eleanor said. Adeline looked at Elliot. "I meant what I said," she told him, "about the train. I want to go home. Your father is getting better," she said. "The doctor says another week and he'll be well enough to manage without me hovering." She paused. "I need to go back, Elliot. The children have been without a teacher for nearly 2 weeks." "Another week," Eleanor said firmly. "Your father needs you here another week." Adeline turned to her mother. Something passed between them, an old practiced negotiation between two women who were alike enough to understand each other and different enough to disagree regularly. "1 week," Adeline said. "1 week," Eleanor confirmed. Adeline looked back at Elliot. "1 week," she said. "I heard," he said. "Will you stay?" He looked at her steadily. "I said I would go when you were ready to go," he said. "I meant it then." She nodded. She sat down at the kitchen table and reached for the bread he had cut earlier and ate a piece of it standing up, which meant she was still running on the energy of the confrontation and had not yet come down. And Eleanor poured her tea without being asked, and Elliot went back to what he had been doing. And the kitchen absorbed the aftermath of the scene in the parlor, the way all good kitchens absorb difficult things with warmth and ordinary motion, and the reliable presence of people who are not going anywhere. The next twist arrived from a direction none of them had anticipated. It came not from Charles Whitmore, or from Jonathan's health, or from any of the obvious sources of trouble. It came in a letter which arrived at the Harper house on the 12th day, addressed to Adeline in a handwriting she recognized immediately because she had seen it every week for 2 months on the official correspondence from Willow Creek's town council. Gerald Marsh. She opened it at the kitchen table with Elliot across from her and Eleanor at the stove. She read it. The color drained from her face so completely and so quickly that Elliot was on his feet before he knew he had stood up. "What is it?" he said. She set the letter on the table. She smoothed it flat with one hand, a mechanical gesture, something to do while her mind caught up to what her eyes had just read. "They've hired another teacher," she said. The kitchen went absolutely still. "What?" Eleanor said. "The council." Adeline's voice was very controlled. "Gerald Marsh wrote to inform me that given my extended and unannounced absence, the town has secured the services of a qualified educator from Billings, who will arrive in Willow Creek before the end of the month." She paused. "He says they wish me well in my future endeavors." She said the last 3 words with a flatness that was more devastating than anger. Elliot picked up the letter. He read it. Every word of it was technically courteous. Gerald Marsh had a gift for that, for writing things that were vicious in their implications while remaining entirely civil on the surface. The letter noted Adeline's dedication during her brief tenure. It expressed appreciation for her contributions. It managed, in 2 short paragraphs, to make her feel dismissed, replaceable, and foolish for having left. Elliot set the letter down. "He's been waiting for this," Elliot said. "Marsh, he's been waiting for an excuse since the day you walked into that council meeting." "I know," Adeline said. "He can't do this," Eleanor said sharply from the stove. "He's the chair of the council," Adeline said. "He can do whatever the council allows him to do." She stood up. She walked to the window. She stood there with her back to both of them for a long moment. Elliot watched her. He could see from the set of her shoulders exactly what was happening inside her, the collision between what she felt, which was devastated, and how she managed herself, which was to compress devastation into action as quickly as possible. "I need to go back now," she said. "Not in a week." "Adeline," Eleanor started. "Mother," she turned. "Father is better. The doctor said so yesterday. He's stable and improving, and he has you here, which is everything he needs." She paused. "If I go back now, before the end of the month, before this other person arrives, if I go back and I'm there, in that schoolhouse, with those children, Marsh, we'll have a harder time making this permanent." "Or he'll have already decided, and nothing you do will change it," Eleanor said. Not cruelly. Maybe, Adeline said. But at least I will have tried. She looked at her mother. I can't stay here, Mother. Every day I stay here is a day those children don't have a teacher. Is a day Marsh believes I've abandoned the post. She paused. I have not abandoned it. Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. 3 days, Eleanor said finally. Give me 3 more days with you. Adeline looked at her mother's face. She crossed the kitchen. She put her arms around Eleanor Harper and held her, which was not something she did easily or often, and Eleanor held her back with the fierceness of a woman sending her daughter into uncertain territory and knowing it. 3 days, Adeline said. Eleanor nodded against her shoulder. Over Adeline's shoulder, Eleanor looked at Elliot. He met her eyes. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The conversation with Jonathan came that afternoon. Adeline sat beside his chair and told him about Marsh's letter and what she intended to do, and Jonathan listened without interrupting, which was how he listened when something was serious. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. You're going back to fight him, Jonathan said. I'm going back to do my job, Adeline said. If Marsh chooses to make that a fight, that's his decision. That is the same thing stated 2 different ways, Jonathan said. She looked at him. Yes, she admitted it is. He reached over and put his hand on hers. Good, he said. Fight cleanly. Don't let him make you smaller than you are. I won't, she said. He squeezed her hand. There's something I want to say to you, he said. About Mr. Waverley, she stilled. Father, let me finish, he said. I have been in this armchair for 2 weeks, thinking about things I should have said and things I shouldn't have, and I have a few left in the first category. He paused. That man came 3,000 miles with you because you asked him to in a moment of need. He has been in this house every day, helping your mother, sitting with me, asking nothing and complaining about nothing. He looked at her. He told me he won't presume your answer. She held her father's gaze. He said that? She said quietly. He said it the way he says everything, Jonathan said. Like it was simply true and didn't require elaboration. He paused. Adeline, in 31 years of teaching, I met perhaps a dozen people with that quality. The rest of us have to work at honesty. For some people it is simply the default position. He looked at her steadily. Don't make him wait longer than he has to. She was quiet. I'm not trying to make him wait, she said. I know, Jonathan said. But sometimes what we're not trying to do is what we end up doing anyway. He released her hand and picked up his book. Go back to Montana, fight Marsh, and then pay attention to what's in front of you. She stood. She leaned down and kissed the top of his head. He patted her hand. Send me a report on the school, he said. In detail. I want to know how many students, curriculum, what results. You'll have it by December, she said. November, he said. December, she said firmly. He opened his book. November 15th, he said. She walked out smiling. Elliot was on the front step when she came out. He had his hat in his hands, and he was looking at the street with the expression he wore when he was thinking through something methodical and complex, not troubled. Exactly, but occupied. She sat down beside him. He talked to you about me, she said. He's your father, Elliot said. That's what fathers do. What did he say? I told you before, things that are mine to keep. She looked at him sideways. You're very consistent, she said. It's easier than being otherwise. She was quiet for a moment. We need to go back, she said. In 3 days. I got a letter from Marsh. He nodded. I know, he said. I figured it was something like that. She turned to look at him. You knew before I said anything? You had the look, he said. The one where something has happened that needs to be fixed, and you're already 3 steps into figuring out how to fix it. She stared at him. I have a look, she said. You have several, he said. That's one of them. She was quiet for a moment, processing the idea that she was apparently readable to this man in ways she had not fully accounted for. Are you going to tell me I should stay for my father? She said. No, he said. Are you going to tell me Marsh can be managed from a distance? No, he said. He can't. Are you going to tell me anything? She said. He turned and looked at her. 3 days is long enough to get ready, he said. I'll write to Pete tonight and tell him we're coming back. She looked at him. Something moved through her, that she did not have a precise name for a warmth, that was partly gratitude and partly something older and deeper than gratitude, something that lived below the level of words. "Just like that," she said. "Just like that," he said. She looked at the street. "Gerald Marsh is going to be very unpleasant about this," she said. "Probably," Elliot said. "He has the council. He has 4 men on the council," Elliot said. "2 of whom have children in that school." He paused. Frank Dooley's boy learned to read this fall. Thomas Briggs went from failing arithmetic to being the top student in the class. He looked at her. "Marsh has 4 votes. You have 14 families." She stared at him. "You've been thinking about this," she said. "I've had time," he said. "You've been busy with your family." "Elliot." She turned fully toward him. "Have you been strategizing about Marsh while you've been cutting bread in my mother's kitchen?" "Somebody had to," he said. She laughed, that unguarded, genuine laugh that changed everything about her face. He watched it happen. He was careful, as always, not to let on how much he liked seeing it. "Tell me," she said. "Tell me the strategy," he told her. He laid it out with the same methodical clarity he'd brought to fence lines and water rights, which families had children in the school, which of them had seen specific results, which of them were on speaking terms with which council members, where the pressure points were, and how to apply them without appearing to apply them, which was the part that mattered most, because Marsh would be looking for something to accuse her of, and she needed to give him nothing. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was looking at him with an expression he did not entirely recognize. "You did all this," she said slowly, "while you were supposed to be sightseeing in Boston." "I don't sightsee," he said. "No," she agreed, "you strategize in other people's kitchens." She shook her head. "Elliot, this is how did you know who to ask about the families? You've never even—" "I talked to Dorothy Pierce before we left," he said. "She knows everyone. Of course she does," Adeline said faintly. "And I wrote to Carl Briggs, that's Thomas's father, the one who said you wouldn't last the winter," he wrote back, "and told me Thomas has been doing his arithmetic problems voluntarily. At home, in the evenings." He paused. "Carl Briggs is on Marsh's side of a lot of things." "He won't be on Marsh's side of this." Adeline pressed her hand flat against the step. She looked at it. Then she looked at Elliot Waverly, sitting beside her in Boston with his hat in his hands and his dark eyes steady, and a complete tactical map of Willow Creek, Montana organized in his head, assembled while she had been focused on her father. "Why?" she said. He looked at her. "Because those children deserve a teacher who fights for them," he said. "And their teacher deserves someone who fights with her." He paused. "I figured this was the part I could do." The front step was very quiet. From inside the house, Eleanor's voice carried something ordinary, something about dinner. "Elliot," Adeline said. "Ma'am, don't call me ma'am." "Adeline," he said. She looked at him directly. "I'm going to ask you something," she said. "And I need you to answer me honestly, not carefully. Not in the way you answer things when you're protecting someone's feelings." She paused. "Honestly." "All right," he said. "When we go back to Willow Creek," she said, "and the school is settled, and Marsh has been dealt with." She stopped. She started again. "When everything is ordinary again. And the ranch and the schoolhouse and the valley are all exactly what they were before I arrived." She held his gaze. "Will you still feel the same way?" He looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said. She stilled. "No," she said. "I'll feel more," he said. "I always feel more when I've seen what a person does when things are hard." He held her gaze. "You've been hard things for 2 weeks. I've seen every part of it. The frightened parts and the fierce parts and the parts where you don't know what to do and the parts where you figure it out anyway." He paused. "I don't feel less, Adeline. I feel more. That's the honest answer." She looked at him. Her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with tears and everything to do with something being recognized. "All right," she said softly. "All right," he said. They sat on the step while evening came on, and the street quieted, and the lamp in the Harper window came on behind them, reliable as always, the signal that the house was open and the people inside were awake. The 3 days passed in the way of days that are running out. Jonathan rallied considerably sitting at the dinner table on the second evening, eating properly, asking Elliot detailed questions about water rights law in Montana that turned into a 2-hour conversation that Eleanor eventually had to interrupt by pointing out that Jonathan was supposed to be resting. "I'm resting my body," Jonathan said. "My mind is fine." "Your body and your mind live in the same house," Eleanor said. "Go to bed." He went, still talking over his shoulder to Elliot about the specifics of territorial land law. Elliot followed as far as the study doorway and then stood there fielding questions until Eleanor physically appeared in the hall and gave him the look of a woman who has reached her limit. "Good night, Mr. Waverly," she said. "Good night, Mrs. Harper," he said and went. On the last evening, Adeline and her mother sat together in the kitchen after Jonathan had gone to bed and Elliot had returned to the boarding house, and they had the conversation that had been building since the first day. Eleanor poured tea she did not drink and sat across from her daughter and looked at her with the particular expression of a mother who has things to say and is deciding how many of them to say. "Tell me," Adeline said. "He's not what I expected," Eleanor said. "I know. When you wrote about a cattle rancher from Montana, I had a specific picture in mind." Eleanor paused. "He is not that picture." "No, he's quieter than I expected," Eleanor said. "And more than the quiet lets on." She wrapped her hands around her cup. "Your father likes him. I know that too. Your father doesn't like people easily," Eleanor said. "Especially people who come to tell him something about his daughter." "What did Elliot tell him?" Adeline said. Eleanor looked at her. "Ask him yourself," she said. "It was between them." She paused. "But I will tell you this. Your father said to me last night, after you'd gone to bed, that in 31 years of teaching he had trusted perhaps a dozen people on instinct alone." She met her daughter's eyes. "Elliot Waverly is one of them." Adeline was quiet. "Mother," she said, "am I being reckless?" Eleanor considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "You left Boston for Montana," she said. "Most people would call that reckless." "You called it a calling." She paused. "Is this different?" Adeline thought about it. "No," she said slowly. "It's the same impulse. It's knowing something before you can fully explain why you know it." "Then it isn't reckless," Eleanor said. "It's instinct. And your instincts have been right before." She stood up. She carried her untouched tea to the sink. "Don't let fear make you slower than you need to be," she said without turning around. "Fear is useful for keeping you honest. It is not useful for keeping you stuck." She set the cup down. She turned around. "Go to sleep, Adeline," she said. "You have a train to catch in the morning." The departure was early. Jonathan came to the door in his coat and his blanket, leaning on Eleanor's arm, which he required now but which he bore with the dignity of a man accepting what was necessary without dramatizing it. He embraced Adeline for a long time. "November 15th, he said into her hair. "December 1st, she said. He pulled back and looked at her. He looked at her the way he had always looked at her, not as a child to be directed, or a woman to be managed, but as a person he had always respected, from the moment she was old enough to deserve it. "I'm proud of you," he said. "I don't say it enough." She pressed her lips together. "Yes, you do," she said. "You say it every time you let me do the thing I need to do, instead of the thing that's easier." He smiled. He turned to Elliot. He extended his hand. Elliot took it. Jonathan Harper held the handshake a moment longer than necessary. "Take care of her," he said. "She takes care of herself," Elliot said. "I just try to keep up." Jonathan laughed, a real one, full and unexpected. "Good answer," he said. He let go. Eleanor stepped forward and embraced Adeline again, quickly and fiercely, and then she turned to Elliot and she did something she had not done once in the entire time he had been in her house. She took his face briefly in both her hands, the way mothers do with children they are sending into the world, and she looked at him with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and instruction. She did not say a word. She didn't need to. He nodded. She released him. They picked up their bags and walked to the waiting carriage, and Elliot helped Adeline up and then climbed in himself, and the carriage moved off down the street, and when Adeline looked back through the small rear window, her parents were still standing at the door in the early morning cold, Jonathan in his blanket, Eleanor upright and composed, and the lamp in the front window was still burning behind them, the way it always burned. The way it would burn every night, as long as Jonathan Harper had anything to say about it. She turned back around. She sat forward. She was going home. Beside her, Elliot was quiet in the way he was always quiet, not absent, not withdrawn, simply present without requiring anything from the silence. After a moment, she put her hand on the seat beside her. Not reaching for his, just placing it there, open, palm up. He looked at it. He put his hand over hers. They rode to the station like that, through the Boston morning, through the streets she had grown up in and chosen to leave, and was choosing to leave again, and the feeling in her chest was not loss and it was not regret. It was direction. It was the specific clarity of knowing exactly where you were going and exactly why and exactly who you were going with. The train was waiting. For once in its life, it was on time. The westbound train pulled into Willow Creek on a Thursday morning, and the first person who saw them step off the platform was Thomas Briggs. He was sitting on the same barrel he had been sitting on the day Adeline arrived, chewing the same style of dry straw, wearing the same expression of a child who has been told not to stare. But this time, the moment his eyes landed on Adeline, he was off that barrel and across the platform before she had both feet on the ground. "You came back," he said. "I said I would," she said. He looked at her with the intensity of a 12-year-old processing significant relief. "Marsh told my pa you weren't coming back," he said. "He told everybody. Said the new teacher was arriving Friday." Adeline looked at Elliot. Elliot looked at the platform. "Today is Thursday," he said. "Yes, it is," Adeline said. She picked up her bag. "Thomas," she said, "I need you to do something for me." "Yes, ma'am. I need you to go to every family in this town that has a child in that school and tell them that Miss Harper is back and the schoolhouse will be open tomorrow morning at the regular time." She paused. "Can you do that?" Thomas Briggs stood up straight. "I can do it by noon," he said. "Then go," she said. He went at a dead run. Elliot watched him disappear around the corner of the livery stable and looked back at Adeline. "Friday," he said. "I heard," she said. "We have one day." "What do you need?" She was already thinking. He could see it, that focused inward look she got when she was assembling a plan from its component parts. She stood on the platform with her bag in her hand and her eyes on the middle distance and her mind moving faster than the train that had just brought them home. "I need to be in that schoolhouse before Marsh knows I'm back," she said. "I need to be there. With the children, with the register open and the lesson started, before he has time to do anything official." She looked at him. "Presence, that's what matters. If I am demonstrably present and the school is demonstrably functioning, he has nothing." "He has a letter of appointment for the teacher from Billings," Elliot said. "That letter was written because I was absent," she said. "I'm not absent anymore. He'll argue the position has been formally filled." "He'll argue it to a council," she said, "and the council will have to vote. And before they vote, every parent in this town is going to have something to say." She met his eyes. "That's not a guarantee." "No," he said, "but it's the best chance I have." "Yes," he said. She nodded once, decision made. "Go talk to Pete and Carl," she said. "Tell them you're back." "And then?"
She stopped.
"And then?" he said. "And then I'd appreciate it if you came to the schoolhouse," she said. "I may need a witness." He picked up his own bag. "I'll be there by mid-morning," he said. She walked off the platform toward the red door. He watched her go straight-spined, quick step. Already somewhere 3 moves ahead of the present moment, and he thought that there was possibly no sight in the world more clarifying than watching Adeline Harper walk toward something she had decided to fight for. He picked up his bag and went to find his ranch hands. The schoolhouse was cold when she unlocked it. 2 weeks of disuse had settled into the walls and the floor and the shelf of books along the back. And there was a particular quality to the silence of an empty school that was different from any other kind of silence. It had the specific hollowness of a place that was made to be full and wasn't. Adeline set her bag on the desk and stood in the center of the room and looked at it. The maps were still on the wall. The nature specimens were still on the windowsill. The clock she had installed with the supply money was still ticking in the corner, reliable and indifferent, marking time regardless of whether anyone was there to hear it. She had been gone 17 days, it felt longer. She lit the stove herself, because there was no one else to do it, and while it was heating, she opened the register and turned to the last page of entries and picked up a pen and wrote the date at the top of the next line. Then she sat down in her chair and waited. The first child arrived at 8:30. It was Clara Patterson, the girl who had lain on her stomach at the creek's edge and trailed her hand
The current income.
with the expression of someone discovering that the world was larger than she'd been told. She appeared in the doorway in her coat and her boots, and she looked at Adeline with the careful assessing look of a 7-year-old who has been told something and needs to verify it with her own eyes. "You're here," Clara said. "I'm here," Adeline said. Clara came in and sat down at her desk without another word, which was the most eloquent response she could have given. By 9 o'clock there were 9 children in the room. By 9:15 there were 12. By 9:30, when Adeline called the room to order and began the morning with the reading exercise she had been running since her 3rd week in Willow Creek, all 14 children were present, including 2 who had never arrived before 9:45 in their lives. Thomas Briggs had apparently been very thorough. Adeline was halfway through the morning reading when the schoolhouse door opened. Gerald Marsh stepped in. He was not alone. Frank Dooley was behind him, and behind Frank was a man Adeline did not recognize, middle-aged, carrying a leather satchel, wearing the expression of someone who has arrived at a situation that is more complicated than he was led to believe. The room went silent. 14 children turned to look at the door. Adeline did not stand up. She kept her finger on the page. "Good morning, Mr. Marsh," she said pleasantly. "We're in the middle of a lesson. If you'd like to observe, there are chairs along the back wall." Gerald Marsh looked at the room full of children. He looked at the register open on the desk. He looked at Adeline Harper sitting in her chair with her finger on the page of a reader and the expression of a woman who has no intention of moving. Something moved across his face that was not quite surprise and not quite fury, but lived in the neighborhood of both. "Miss Harper," he said, "I sent you a letter. I received it," she said. "And I'm here, as you can see." She paused. 14 students present. All accounted for. She looked at the man with the satchel. "I'm sorry, I don't believe we've been introduced." The man with the satchel looked at Marsh. Marsh looked at him. "This is Mr. Hennessy," Marsh said. "He has traveled from Billings to—" "I understand why he's here," Adeline said. "Mr. Hennessy, I apologize that you've made this trip. I was called away by a family emergency, and I have returned. The position is not vacant." She paused. "I hope the town of Willow Creek will reimburse your travel expenses." "That would be the right thing to do." Mr. Hennessy blinked. "Miss Harper," Marsh said, and his voice had shifted into the register of a man who is done being pleasant. "The council has made its decision. You were absent without proper notice for nearly 3 weeks. The position requires a teacher," Adeline said. "I am the teacher. I am present. My students are present." She looked at him steadily. "If you want to remove me from this school, Mr. Marsh, you will need to call a council vote. And I would suggest you do that with the full knowledge that every parent in this town will have something to say about it first." Marsh stared at her. Frank Dooley shifted his weight behind him, which was not the movement of a man who was entirely aligned with his position. The door opened again. Carl Briggs walked in. He was a big man, Carl broad in the shoulders, not given to speeches, the kind of man who made his position clear through presence rather than words. He stepped inside the schoolhouse and looked at the scene before him, and looked at Marsh, and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "My boy went from failing arithmetic to being the best in the class." Marsh turned to look at him. He started. "I'm not finished," Carl Briggs said. He was not loud. He was the opposite of loud. "I told Miss Harper she wouldn't last the winter. I said it to her face, near about the first day she arrived." He paused. "I was wrong, and I don't say that often, so I want it said clearly." He looked at Marsh. "You want to call a vote, Gerald? You go ahead and call it." but you call it with me in the room." The silence in the schoolhouse was absolute. 14 children had stopped breathing. Mr. Hennessy from Billings was looking at the floor with the expression of a man calculating the next available train back the way he'd come. Frank Dooley took a very small step backward. Gerald Marsh stood in the center of the room for a long moment. He was not a stupid man. He understood what had just happened, that the ground he had believed was solid had not been, that the support he had counted on had shifted, that he was standing in a schoolroom full of children and their record books, and a woman who was not going to be moved, and that whatever he said next would define the remainder of his position in this town more completely than anything he had done before it. He picked up his hat. "We will revisit this at the next council meeting," he said. "Of course," Adeline said. "I'll have a full progress report ready for the council's review." Marsh walked out. Frank Dooley followed, looking neither at Adeline nor at Carl Briggs. Mr. Hennessy from Billings paused at the door. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, Miss Harper," he said quietly. "For what it's worth, this is a fine-looking school." "Thank you," she said. "Safe travels," he went. Carl Briggs looked at Adeline. "Thomas talks about this school every evening," he said. "Every single evening." He put his hat back on. "Good morning, Miss Harper." "Good morning, Mr. Briggs," she said. "Thank you." He nodded once and left. Adeline turned back to her class. 14 faces were staring at her. Clara Patterson's hand was raised. Adeline said. "Can we finish the story?" Clara said. "We were on chapter 4 when you left." Adeline sat down. "She found the page," she said, "where we left off." She read. And just like that, the school was in session again, as if the last 17 days had been merely a pause in a sentence that had been waiting to be finished. Elliot arrived at mid-morning as promised. He stood in the doorway for a moment and took in the room 12 children at their desks, 2 more squeezed in along the back wall on chairs, brought from the church. Adeline at the front writing on the chalkboard with the focused efficiency of someone who has 17 days of lost ground and to make up and intends to make up every inch of it. She looked up. She saw him. She went back to the board. "Good morning, Mr. Waverly," she said without turning around. "Morning," he said. "How'd it go?" "Marsh came," Thomas Briggs announced from his desk. Miss Harper didn't even stand up. "That's enough, Thomas," Adeline said. "Fractions." Thomas looked back at his paper. Elliot stood at the back of the room and watched her teach for 10 minutes, and it was not the first time he had done this. He had watched her teach before, at the creek. On the rare occasions he had stopped by with a question that turned into a longer visit. But this time was different, because this time he knew what she had said to Charles Whitmore in the Boston parlor, and he had heard Jonathan Harper's voice in his memory, telling him not to make her wait longer than necessary. And he was watching a woman who had crossed the country and back and fought a council and walked into a cold room and lit a stove herself and had 14 children reading by 9:30. He knew what he was going to do. He had known since the train platform in Boston. He had been waiting for the right moment. He understood, watching her at the chalkboard, that there was no perfect moment. There was only the moment you chose. He would choose it today. But not yet. First, the school needed to be secure. The council meeting was called for the following Tuesday. In the 5 days between Adeline's return and that meeting, something moved through Willow Creek that Gerald Marsh had not anticipated and could not easily counter. It moved the way news moved in small towns, kitchen to kitchen to kitchen, fence line to fence line, except that it was not exactly news. Testimony. Mary Patterson told Dorothy Pierce at the post office that Clara had read an entire chapter of a book aloud at dinner, and that Jonathan Patterson had had to leave the table briefly because he was a man who did not cry in front of his wife and daughter, but he had needed a moment. Dorothy Pierce told the Hendersons, who told the Macreadys, who told the Fosters, who had 3 children in the school, and who had the particular social weight in Willow Creek that came from having been there the longest. Robert Foster showed up at Elliot's ranch on Saturday morning and sat in the kitchen and drank coffee and said, "Marsh is going to try to make this about procedure. About the absence. He's going to keep it narrow so the personal arguments don't have room." I know, Elliot said. How do we stop that? Elliot looked at his cup. We don't fight the procedure argument, he said. We make a different argument. We make it about the school, about what the school was before she arrived and what it is now. He paused. Numbers. Specific students, specific results. You can't argue with a number. Robert Foster nodded slowly. I can get the attendance records from before, he said. My wife kept them the year we had no teacher at all. 4 students showing up irregular. He paused. 14 now. Every day. That's the argument, Elliot said. Robert Foster stood up. He put out his hand. Elliot shook it. She doesn't know you're doing this, does she? Robert said. It was not quite a question. She'd tell me it wasn't necessary, Elliot said. She'd want to fight it herself. She can fight it herself, Robert said. We're just making sure she doesn't have to fight it alone. After he left, Elliot sat at his kitchen table for a long moment. He thought about what Adeline had said on the Boston train platform about Edmund, about the man who had tried to make her smaller than she was, who had loved the idea of her rather than the actual her. He thought about the difference between helping someone fight and fighting for them, between standing beside a person and standing in front of them. He had been careful every step of the way to stand beside. He would keep being careful about that. The council meeting was held on Tuesday evening in the town hall, and every seat was filled. Elliot had not seen the town hall that full since the flood meeting of 1882, when half the valley had shown up to argue about the levee. Gerald Marsh sat at the head of the table with Frank Dooley on his right, and 2 other council members, whose names were Potter and Webb, both of whom looked like men who had arrived expecting a smaller evening. Adeline sat across from them with her register, and her attendance records, and the progress reports she had written for every student. 10 pages of documentation that she had up 2 nights producing, and that she set on the table with the quiet confidence of someone who knows their case is in the facts. Robert Foster sat in the front row of chairs with his wife's attendance records from 1884. Carl Briggs sat beside him. Dorothy Pierce sat beside Carl Briggs. The rest of the room was standing. Marsh opened the meeting with the procedural argument, exactly as Elliot had predicted: the terms of employment, the expectation of notice, the formal letter of appointment to Mr. Hennessy, the responsibility of the council to maintain continuity of education. He made it narrow. He made it about the absence, and Adeline let him finish. She waited until the room was quiet and Marsh had settled back with the expression of a man who believes he has just won. Then she opened her register. She read the attendance numbers from September 1st, her first full week, through the week before she left for Boston. Then she read the 4 years of records Robert Foster had brought, which showed an average of 4 students attending with significant irregularity and 2 years with no teacher at all. She read the names of every student currently enrolled. She read Clara Patterson's reading level at the start of October non-reader and Clara Patterson's reading level now 3rd grade primer, reading independently. She read Thomas Briggs's arithmetic scores from September and from the week before she left. She went through every student. The room was absolutely silent by the time she finished. Marsh cleared his throat. The question before the council, he said, is not the teacher's competence. It is Mr. Marsh. It was Potter who spoke, the council member who had been quiet for the entire meeting and who had a granddaughter in the 2nd row who had learned to write her own name in October. I've heard enough. He looked at the rest of the council. I move that we confirm Miss Harper's continued appointment. Full terms, full salary, beginning immediately. Webb seconded it before Marsh could draw breath. The vote was 3-0. He did it alone. The room did not erupt into noise. It did something quieter and more powerful. It let out a long collective breath, the kind that comes after something tightly held has been released, and then it began to talk among itself in the low, warm register of people who are satisfied. Adeline closed her register. She looked up. Across the room, standing at the back against the wall with his hat in his hands and his dark eyes on her, was Elliot Waverley. He had not said a word the entire evening. He had simply been there. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked down at her papers and began to organize them with the quiet efficiency of a woman who has what she came for and is already thinking about what comes next. But her hands were not entirely steady, and the warmth in her chest had nothing to do with the outcome of the vote. The town cleared slowly. People stopped to speak to Adeline on their way out. Brief words, firm handshakes, the particular communication of people who are not given to displays and are making an exception. Carl Briggs said nothing at all, just clapped her once on the shoulder the way he would have clapped a man, which from Carl was about as expressive as it got. Dorothy Pierce hugged her, which was Dorothy and required no explanation. Gerald Marsh walked out without speaking to anyone. Frank Dooley paused near the door and looked at Adeline, and seemed to be working towards something to say. He arrived at "My children are doing well," which was not an apology and was not nothing. "They're working hard," Adeline said. "You should be proud." He nodded and went. By the time the room was empty, Elliot was still at the back wall. He had not moved. Adeline walked to him. She stopped in front of him. "Robert Foster," she said. He looked at her. "He came to see you," she said. "Before the meeting, didn't he?" It was not a question. "Yes," Elliot said. "And the attendance records."
That was your idea.
"It was the right argument," he said. "You would have made it yourself if you'd had another day." "I would have," she agreed, "but I didn't have another day." He said nothing. She looked at him. "You stood at the back of that room for 2 hours," she said, "and you didn't say a single word." "It wasn't my room to speak in," he said, "but you made sure everyone else had what they needed to speak," she said. He turned his hat in his hands. "I just made sure the ground was ready," he said. "You did the rest." She looked at him for a long moment. The town hall was empty and the lamp was burning low, and outside, Willow Creek was settling into its evening quiet. And she was standing 3 feet from the man who had gone to Boston with her and cut bread in her mother's kitchen and written to Pete Odom about the South Fence and built a tactical map of a small Montana town in his head while she was focused on her father, and who had just spent 2 hours standing against a wall, saying nothing because he understood that this particular fight needed to belong to her. "Elliot," she said. "Adeline," he said. "Ask me," she said. He went still. "Ask you what?" he said, very carefully. "You know what?" she said. He looked at her for a long time. He set his hat on the nearest chair. He straightened up. "I'm not a man with a great many words," he said. "I've never been that kind of man. I don't have poetry or speeches." He paused. "What I have is a ranch that I've built for 11 years and a life that I've been living honestly and a clear understanding of who I am and what I can give." He held her gaze. "I can give you a home that's yours as much as mine. I can give you a husband who will never once ask you to be smaller than you are. I can give you a man who knows what he's getting and wants exactly that." He stopped. "Adeline Harper, will you marry me?" He did not say it like a question. He said it the way he said everything that mattered, simply directly, as though the answer were something he was prepared to receive, honestly, regardless of what it was. She looked at him. She thought about the schoolhouse steps where she had asked him a careless question and received a truthful answer. She thought about the train east, and the way he had listened to her talk about Dickens for 45 minutes without once looking at the door. She thought about the kitchen in Boston and his hand over hers on the table and her father's voice saying, "Don't make him wait longer than he has to." She thought about the fact that she had truly known on approximately her 3rd cup of coffee in his kitchen in early October and had spent 2 months telling herself it was too soon to know anything. "Yes," she said. He reached out and took her hand. She let him. They stood in the empty town hall of Willow Creek, Montana, in the autumn of 1887, 2 people who had taken the long way to the obvious conclusion, and the lamp burned low between them, and outside the cottonwoods had gone gold, and the valley was still, and the schoolhouse waited with its red door and its 14 students and its clock ticking in. The corner reliable and indifferent, marking time. They were married in November on a Saturday, on the same steps where she had asked the question that started everything. The ceremony was small the way everything true tends to be small, not because it was unimportant, but because the important things do not require an audience to make them real. Jonathan Harper traveled from Boston. He arrived 2 days before, looking better than Adeline had feared and worse than he pretended. And he spent those 2 days sitting in Elliot's kitchen, drinking coffee, and asking questions about water rights that were really questions about character. And Elliot answered all of them with the same direct patience he brought to everything. And by the wedding morning, Jonathan had stopped asking questions because he had all the answers he needed. Eleanor stood beside him with her hands clasped, and her posture perfect, and her eyes bright in the particular way of a woman who has been right about something and is too dignified to say so. Clara Patterson was in the front row with a flower in each hand that she had picked herself. Thomas Briggs stood at the back with his arms crossed in the way he had of pretending he was somewhere else when something was making him feel more than he wanted to admit. Carl Briggs stood beside his son and did not attempt to pretend anything. Dorothy Pierce cried immediately and without apology. Robert Foster stood with his wife and nodded once at Elliot with the nod of a man who has done right by someone and knows it. Gerald Marsh was not there. Nobody mentioned his absence. When the minister asked Elliot if he took this woman, Elliot said yes the way he said everything important quietly, without drama, as though the decision had been made long before the question was asked, and the question was simply the formality of saying it out loud. When the minister asked Adeline if she took this man, she said yes with her chin up and her eyes clear, and her voice as steady as it had ever been, in a classroom full of children who needed her to be someone they could count on. And then it was done, and the ranch was a place where one man lived in the particular silence of a life that had not yet found its shape. It was a home with books on the shelf and a clock ticking in the schoolhouse around the bend, and a woman who argued with councils on her third day, and a man stood at the back of rooms and made sure the ground was ready, and 14 children, who were learning that the world was larger than they had been told. Jonathan Harper stood on the schoolhouse steps afterward and looked at his daughter standing beside Elliot Waverly in the November light, and said to Eleanor, quietly, "I was right." "You usually are," Eleanor said. "Don't make it a habit of saying so." He smiled. He watched his daughter tip her head back and laugh at something Elliot had said, that unguarded, genuine laugh that changed her whole face, and he watched Elliot watch her laugh with the careful, contained expression of a man who is very aware of how fortunate he is and has decided to be worthy of it. And Adeline Harper, who was now Adeline Waverly, who had left Boston with 2 trunks and box of books and a belief that the places that needed her most were the places that were not yet thriving, she looked across the yard at the red door of the schoolhouse and felt something settle in her chest that had been restless since she was old enough to know that the life she wanted was not the life she was expected to want. It was not relief, it was not arrival, it was something simpler and more durable than either of those things. It was rightness. The specific, undeniable rightness of being exactly where you are supposed to be, with exactly the person you are supposed to be with, doing exactly the work you were made to do. Some people spend their whole lives looking for that feeling. Adeline Waverly had found it on a pair of schoolhouse steps in Willow Creek, Montana. On the day she asked a quiet man a careless question, and he gave her the truest answer she had ever received. And Elliot Waverly, who had spent 11 years building something in silence and waiting without knowing what he was waiting for, looked at his wife standing in the November light with her chin up and her eyes clear and a laugh still in her voice, and understood that every fence post and every early morning and every long quiet evening had been leading, without his knowing it, to exactly this. He had been waiting, and she had arrived, and that was enough, that was everything.